For her entire life, she hid this strange condition. When she cried, her tears didn't fall. They froze on her cheeks. At a royal ceremony, one glance from the Alpha King revealed the terrifying truth. She wasn't flawed. She was the last descendant of the Frost Wolf bloodline, extinct for centuries, the one prophesied to bear the next supreme Alpha. She was just an Omega, invisible in a world ruled by ancient bloodlines and raw power. But her secret, a biological impossibility, made her the most dangerous and valuable wolf alive. The prophecy of the Frost Wolf's return was a fairy tale until the king saw the ice on her skin. Now the entire political order is about to shatter, because when an Alpha King finds his prophesied queen, he doesn't just claim her, he starts a war. To understand the bomb about to detonate, you have to understand the world she lived in, a rigid hierarchy colder than the ice on her face. In the Northern Territories, power wasn't just about strength, it was about blood. Ancient, magical lineages determined everything. At the top were the elemental alphas, kings whose very scent could command the weather, the storm bringers, the earth shapers, and once, centuries ago, the frost wolves. But the frost wolf line was declared extinct, hunted to oblivion in the purge of the bleak winter. Their crime, a prophecy that one of their Omega daughters would one day bear the next supreme alpha, a ruler who would unite all packs under eternal ice. The other elemental lines saw that not as destiny, but as a threat to their own power, so they erased them, or so they believed. This is where we find our Omega. Her name is Ilara, a name chosen for its simplicity, its obscurity. She is 22, with hair the color of winter oak and skin so pale it seems to hold a light of its own. She works in the vast royal archives of the Stone Peak Pack, a mid-tier territory with ambitions. Her job is mundane. She catalogues trade ledgers, organizes treaties, and mends old scrolls. She is invisible by design. Because from her earliest memory, Ilara knew she was broken. The first time she cried as a child after scraping her knee, her mother's gasp wasn't from sympathy, it was from horror. Tiny, perfect shards of ice had formed on her cheeks, glittering in the firelight. Her mother, a low-level Omega with no notable blood, understood enough. This was a death sentence, a sign of a bloodline that was forbidden to exist. So they hid it. Her mother taught her the art of suppression, to swallow sorrow until it choked her, to turn her face into the wind so any moisture would be blamed on the cold, to never, ever let anyone see her cry. When her mother died of a fever when Ilara was 15, she didn't shed a single tear at the graveside. The pain built a glacier inside her chest. She was taken in by the pack as an orphaned ward, given her clerical work, and forgotten. She became a ghost in the stone halls, her strange pallor and quiet demeanor marking her as frail, perhaps sickly, unimportant, but the secret froze her from the inside out. She was a living fossil, a relic of a forgotten war, hiding in plain sight. Now let's talk about the king. Lysander Thorn, Alpha of the Stormbringer line, sovereign of the entire Northern Reach. He is not just a ruler, he is a historian, a scholar of lost bloodlines. Where other alphas burn through history, he memorizes it. He knows the exact shade of blue that flashed in a frost wolf's eyes. He knows the scent they were said to carry, not just winter, but the ozone crackle of a blizzard at its height. And he privately has always believed the prophecy was not a threat, but a promise. His reign is powerful, but unstable. The other elemental alphans circle like vultures, challenging his borders. Uniting the packs seems like a fairy tale, but he needs a symbol, a miracle. He needs the impossible to walk into his court. The stage for disaster or destiny is the Rite of the Thawing Sun, a massive public ceremony held in the central courtyard of Stone Peak. It's a political theater. Every pack sends representatives, alliances are brokered, and Alpha King Lysander is the guest of honor, touring his territories. For Ilara, it's just another long day of work. She's tasked with managing the scrolls for the oath-swearing, ensuring the correct ancestral treaties are on display. She stands at the edge of the dais, head bowed, bundled in a grey cloak, hopping to blend into the stonework. The ceremony drones on. Lysander sits on his temporary throne, his expression one of polite, regal boredom. Then the Stone Peak Alpha introduces his son, a brash young Alpha heir, for a blessing. This heir, arrogant and cruel, decides to make an example. He points to a young Omega servant who has stumbled, spilling wine. He berates her publicly, his voice cutting through the cold air. He demands she be stripped of her rank and sent to the border outposts. The girl, no older than 16, begins to sob silently, her shoulders shaking with utter despair. And something in Ilara breaks. She sees herself in that girl, the helplessness, the public humiliation. A lifetime of swallowed tears, of frozen pain, rushes to the surface. She tries to clamp down, to breathe, but it's too much. The dam shatters. A single hot tear of furious empathy wells in her eye and traces a path down her chilled cheek. It doesn't reach her jawline. The sub-zero air hits it, and it freezes, not into a vague smear of ice, but into a delicate, crystalline track. A perfect, glistening scar of solid ice on her pale skin. It catches the weak winter sun and throws back a prism of light. Ilara freezes in pure terror, her heart slamming against her ribs. She ducks her head, a frantic hand coming up to brush it away. But it's too late. On the high dais, King Lysander Thorn goes perfectly still. The bored detachment evaporates from his face. His head, which had been turned toward the commotion, snaps toward her as if pulled by a wire. His nostrils flare, drawing in a long, deliberate breath. His eyes, a turbulent storm gray, narrow. They are no longer looking at a clumsy servant or a political snub. They are analyzing, recognizing. The world seems to slow. The arrogant heir's voice fades to a buzz. The king's gaze locks onto the faint, melting ice streak on Ilara's cheek, then drops to the cobblestones at her feet, where one or two other frozen droplets have fallen and sit like tiny diamonds. His prophecy wasn't in a book. It was here, in a trembling, terrified Omega standing 20 feet away, the last frost wolf, his queen. The air crackles not with storm but with the absolute silence of seismic plates shifting. Every instinct in his body roars to claim her, but he is surrounded by rivals, by those who would kill her in a heartbeat if they understood. A war is no longer a possibility. It is a certainty, and it begins with his next move. The Alpha King did not roar, he did not point. That would have been a death warrant for her. Instead, he wielded silence like a blade. His storm-gray eyes held Ilara's for one more paralyzing second, a silent command screaming in the void between them, "Do not move, do not speak." Then, as if the universe had resumed its rotation, he turned his head back to the stone peak Alpha and his arrogant son. The king's voice, when it came, was calm, but it carried over the entire courtyard like the first rumble of distant thunder. "This display of cruelty toward a pack member is beneath the dignity of this rite," Lysander stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The blessing is denied. The matter of this servant girl's discipline is now mine to settle." The stone peak Alpha paled, his son's mouth hanging open in protest that died before it was born. To challenge the king's judgment here was unthinkable. Lysander gestured to his personal guard, a mountain of a man named Kale who stood at his right hand. "Take the girl to the healing wards. See that she is cared for." It was a masterstroke, a public act of mercy that cemented his authority while covertly removing a witness whose tears might have sparked dangerous questions. But it was just the first move. Then his gaze swept the dais and landed seemingly at random on Ilara. She felt the weight of it like a physical touch. "And you," he said, his voice softening just a fraction, enough to seem paternal, not predatory, "Archivist, you have the scrolls for the trade oaths. Bring them to my solar. This unpleasantness has disrupted the schedule. We will review them privately to expedite the proceedings." Every instinct in Ilara's body screamed to run. This was a trap, he knew, but to refuse a direct, public command from the Alpha King was suicide. The entire courtyard was watching. She dipped into a shallow curtsy, her voice a thin whisper lost to the wind. "Yes, your majesty." She gathered the heavy leather satchel of scrolls, her fingers numb with cold and fear. As she was led away from the dais by another of the king's stoic guards, she felt the eyes of the stone peak Alpha on her back. Not with suspicion yet, but with annoyance. An insignificant Omega causing a bureaucratic hiccup. The walk to the king's temporary quarters in the central keep was a blur of stone corridors and rising dread. The guard opened a heavy oak door and ushered her into a spacious solar. A fire roared in the hearth, but the room felt colder than the courtyard. The door shut behind her with a definitive thud. She was alone. For a full minute, she simply stood, clutching the satchel, waiting. The silence was absolute. Then a hidden panel in the wall beside the fireplace slid open, and King Lysander stepped through. He had shed his ceremonial outer cloak. He was just a man, yet somehow more terrifying for it. The full force of his presence, no longer diluted by distance and crowd, filled the room. It wasn't the oppressive dominance of a bully. It was the gravitational pull of a sovereign star. Ilara's knees buckled, a submissive response her body enacted against her will. She caught herself on the edge of a large desk. "Look at me," he said, the command gentle but inexorable. She forced her head up. His eyes were scanning her face with a scholar's intensity, but beneath it burned a primal, possessive fire. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides. Before she could flinch, his hand was under her chin, his thumb brushing across the spot on her cheek where the tear had frozen. His touch was startlingly warm. "The ice is gone," he murmured, more to himself than to her, "but the skin is cooler there, a residual thermal signature." He leaned closer, inhaling deeply. His eyes snapped shut for a moment, and when they opened, all doubt was gone. Ozone, frost-burned pine. The scent is faint, buried under paper dust and lye soap, but it's there, the scent of the blizzard born. Ilara found her voice, a desperate, broken thing. "I don't know what you mean. Please, I'm just an archivist. It was just the cold, my king. I have a condition." "Your condition," Lysander interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, urgent rumble, "is that you are the last living descendant of Alaric Frostweaver, the last true alpha of the Frost Wolf line. Your condition is a dormant ancestral magic reacting to extreme emotional distress. Your tears don't freeze because of the weather, Ilara. They freeze because you command the cold." The use of her name, her real name, shattered her last defense. She began to tremble violently. "They'll kill me if anyone finds out." "No one will find out," he stated, absolute conviction in his tone, "because you are leaving this pack. Tonight, you are coming with me to the Stormhold, my capital." Panic overrode her fear. "I can't, my life is here, my work." "Your work was a prison you built for yourself to survive," he said, not unkindly. He released her chin and began to pace, the energy of a military strategist taking over. "Listen to me. The Stone Peak Alpha is a fool, but his spymaster is not. It may take hours or days, but someone will re-examine what happened in that courtyard. They will question the servant girl. They will pull records on the sickly archivist with the strange pallor. And when they do, they will come for you. Not to ask questions, to kill you in your sleep and burn your body." He stopped packing and faced her. "I am your only chance at life. More than that, I am the fulfillment of your bloodline's destiny. Do you know the prophecy?" Ilara nodded, the words a childhood nightmare. "The Frost Omega will bear the Supreme Alpha. She will unite the packs under eternal winter." She wrapped her arms around herself. "It's a myth, a story used to justify a genocide." "It is a genetic imperative," Lysander corrected. "The elemental lines have been weakening for generations, inbreeding for political power. The Frost Wolf bloodline possesses a unique, stable magical genome. A union with a Stormbringer Alpha, our offspring would not just be powerful. They would be a true nexus, a unifier. The eternal winter isn't about conquest. It's about stability, an end to the petty wars that have bled our people dry for centuries." He was offering her a cosmic purpose, but all Ilara heard was a gilded cage. "So I am to be a breeding stock for the sake of peace." For the first time, a flicker of frustration crossed Lysander's face. "You are to be my queen my fated mate. The bond is already stirring. Can you not feel it?" And she could. Beneath the terror, a strange, pulling warmth in her core was reaching toward him. It was nothing like the stories of instant, overwhelming passion. It was a deep, gravitational recognition, as undeniable as the tide. It terrified her even more. "The prophecy says bear," she whispered. "It says nothing about love or choice." Lysander's expression softened. He moved back to her, but this time he didn't touch her. He simply stood, letting his scent of petrichor, of lightning-struck stone, wash over her. "The bond will give us the choice. It will show us the path. But first, we must survive the next 24 hours. Do you trust me?" It was the most absurd question she had ever been asked. She met his intense gaze. "No." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Honest, good, you don't need to trust me, you just need to obey me, for now." The plan was set into motion with chilling efficiency. Ilara was to return to the archives as if nothing had happened. At the second bell of the night watch, Kale, the king's guard, would extract her. They would travel not with the king's main retinue, but via covert route, a series of safe houses used by the king's intelligence network. Lysander would create a public diversion, announcing a sudden diplomatic crisis requiring his immediate return to Stormhold, drawing all attention. The afternoon was agony. Every glance from a fellow archivist felt accusatory. Every footstep in the hall sounded like a coming executioner. She moved through her tasks like an automaton, the king's words echoing in her mind. Genetic imperative, breeding stock, your only chance. As dusk fell, a new fear took root. What if he was wrong? What if she was just a freak of nature, a biological glitch? The hope that she was nobody was somehow more comforting than the terrifying burden of being somebody. Back in her tiny cell-like room in the servants' quarters, she packed a small bag. A change of clothes, her mother's lone silver hairpin, a book of poetry. It was the sum total of a life lived in hiding. She sat on her narrow bed, waiting for the bell. The urge to cry was overwhelming, a pressure behind her eyes, but she dared not. She could not risk the evidence, the telltale ice. She swallowed the emotion, adding another layer to the glacier inside her. The bell tolled. A soft tap came at her door. It was Cale, his face an impassive mask. Come quietly. They moved through the back passages of the keep, routes used for servants and supplies. The air grew colder as they descended toward a postern gate. Just as they reached a narrow intersection, a voice cut through the gloom. The archivist, out for a late stroll. Ilara's blood turned to actual ice in her veins. It was Roderick, the Stone Peak spymaster, a lean, sharp-faced man with eyes like flint. He stepped into the lamplight, two hulking enforcers at his shoulders. His gaze slid from Ilara's terrified face to the stoic Cale. King's Guard, Roderick observed, his tone dripping with false courtesy. Escorting a lowly Omega to the privies, how charitable. Cale didn't move. The king requires her for late cataloguing. Stand aside. Cataloguing, at this hour, through the sewage tunnels. Roderick smiled, a thin, cruel slash. My alpha has questions for her first, about her unusual physiology. A healer noted something interesting about the servant girl from the courtyard, said her tears were oddly cold. The game was up. Roderick knew enough to be dangerous. Cale's hand went to the weapon at his belt. She is under the king's protection. This is your only warning. Roderick's smile vanished. Take her. The two enforcers lunged. What happened next was a blur of violence. Cale moved with a speed that belied his size. He broke the first enforcer's arm with a sickening crack, using the man's body as a shield against the second. The confined space echoed with grunts and the scuffle of boots. Ilara pressed herself against the cold stone wall, a scream trapped in her throat. Roderick didn't join the fight. He watched, his eyes fixed on Ilara. He saw her paralyzing fear, and he saw something else. In the chaos, a single, traitorous tear of sheer terror welled in her eye. It trembled on her lash line for a heartbeat before falling. It never hit the ground. In the dank, cold air of the tunnel, it froze against her cheekbone, a tiny, perfect pearl of ice. Roderick's eyes widened, not with confusion, but with dawning, horrifying comprehension. He wasn't just a spymaster, he was a historian. He knew the old descriptions. By the bloody winter winds, he breathed, frost wolf. He didn't shout for more guards. He drew a thin, wickedly sharp dagger from his sleeve. His target was no longer capture. It was eradication. He shoved past the struggling bodies, his intent clear, one quick, silent thrust to the heart, and the prophecy dies here in the dark. Cale saw it, but was pinned by the second enforcer. Ilara was frozen, staring at the blade coming for her. In that split second, the glacier within her shattered. A torrent of fear, a lifetime of suppressed anguish and rage at being hunted for simply existing, erupted. She didn't command it. It commanded her. A wave of cold exploded from her center. It wasn't a wind. It was the sudden, absolute absence of heat. The moisture in the air crystallized with a sound like shattering glass. The stone walls frosted over in an instant. The damp floor flash froze, trapping the boots of the struggling men. Roderick's dagger halted inches from her chest, his arm encased in a sleeve of solid ice up to his elbow. His face was a mask of shock, his skin already turning blue. The fight stopped. Everyone stared at her. Ilara looked at her own hands. A delicate fractal pattern of frost was spreading from her fingertips. She was the source, She was the storm. Kale recovered first. With a brutal kick, he shattered the frozen arm of the enforcer holding him. He didn't look at Roderick, now gasping and dying from rapid hypothermia. He looked at Ilara with new eyes, not just as a package to protect, as a force of nature that had just announced its presence to the world with a cataclysmic signature. "The king," Kale said, his voice hoarse. "We must reach the king. Now, the entire keep will have felt that." He was right. The magical discharge of elemental energy, especially one so long thought extinct, would have rippled out like a shockwave. Every alpha with a shred of sensitivity in a 10-mile radius would have just felt a deep, ancient cold snap across their senses. The hunt was no longer covert. It had just become a race. The magical shockwave was a dinner bell for every predator in the territory. In his solar, King Lysander Thorn felt it like a physical blow to his chest, a sudden, deep ache of cold that blossomed and then vanished. He knew instantly what it meant. Ilara's power had been triggered violently. The covert extraction had failed. He was out of time. He didn't shout for guards. He simply stood, closed his eyes, and reached out with his own storm sense, feeling the ripple of alarm, confusion, and sharp, gathering interest pulsing through the stone of the keep. The hunt was now a scramble. He moved to a carved stone panel on the wall, pressed a sequence, and spoke into a communication crystal. "All units, contingency frost. The package is compromised. Converge on my location and prepare for hostile extraction. The window is 5 minutes." He then took a deep breath, centered himself, and walked out of his solar not as a diplomat, but as a conqueror returning to a battlefield. Meanwhile, in the frozen tunnel, Kale didn't waste a second. He kicked the ice from his boots, grabbed Ilara's arm, her skin was shockingly cold to the touch, and pulled her into a run. "The postern gate is compromised, new route." They took a sharp turn, heading upward now, back into the inhabited parts of the keep. "We are making for the main courtyard. The king's personal skyrider is there." "A skyrider?" Ilara gasped, her breath plumbing in the air, which was still unnaturally cold around her. "A bonded avian, a storm eagle, fast enough to outrun anything they have." They burst out of a servant's entrance into a side gallery overlooking the main hall. Chaos was beginning to brew. Guards were running, not in orderly drills, but in confusion. Shouted questions echoed. "Did you feel that? What in the abyss was that cold? The king is mobilizing his personal guard." Then a new voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the din. It was Alaric, the Stone Peak Alpha. He stood on the central dais, his face a mask of fury and dawning realization. "Seal the keep. No one enters or leaves. I want every stranger, every royal guardsman detained for questioning, and find that archivist. Bring her to me alive." The emphasis on alive was terrifying. He didn't want to kill her yet. He wanted to study her, to use her. Kale pulled Ilara back into the shadows. "They're ahead of schedule. We go through the old armory. It's a straight shot to the courtyard." Their new path was a treacherous maze of disused weapon racks and dusty banners. The air was thick with the smell of rust and old oil. Ilara's mind was reeling, her body trembling with aftershocks. She had killed a man. She had unleashed something inside her she couldn't control. The glacier had melted, and a flood of terrifying power had rushed out. "You need to control it," Kale muttered as they ran, his eyes constantly scanning. That burst was like lighting a beacon. Every alpha for 50 miles felt it. They may not know what it is, but they know it's something powerful and vulnerable. "They're coming." "How?" she begged, tears of frustration threatening. "I don't know how I did it." "Fear," Kale said bluntly. "It was pure survival instinct. Your magic is tied to your emotions. You need to find a different trigger, fast." They reached a heavy, iron-banded door. Kale put his shoulder to it, and it groaned open onto the edge of the main courtyard. The scene was one of controlled pandemonium. The king's retinue was forming up with military precision, his personal guards creating a perimeter. In the center, being fitted with harnesses, were two massive storm eagles, their feathers the color of thunderheads, their golden eyes sharp and intelligent. Lysander stood beside one, his gaze sweeping the battlements. He saw Kale and Ilara emerge, and relief flashed across his face for a microsecond before being replaced by grim determination. He gestured sharply. They had to cross 30 yards of open ground. They were halfway there when a contingent of Stone Peak enforcers, led by the Alpha's brutish Beta, spilled into the courtyard from the opposite side. The Beta pointed. "There, the king is stealing pack property. Stop them." The king's guards closed ranks, weapons drawn. Lysander didn't even look at the Beta. He looked at the Stone Peak Alpha, who now stood on the courtyard steps, watching. "Alaric," Lysander's voice boomed across the space. "Stand down your men. You are interfering with royal passage. This is an act of war." Alaric's face twisted. He was a proud, stupid man, but even he hesitated at the word war. The Beta, however, was all aggression. He barked an order, and a volley of crossbow bolts flew from the battlements above, aimed not at the king, but at Ilara. Kale shoved her down, his body shielding hers. 2 bolts thudded into his armored back. He grunted but didn't fall. The king's storm-grey eyes flashed with lightning. He didn't raise a hand. Above them, the sky, which had been clear, roiled with sudden boiling clouds. A deafening crack of thunder split the air, and a bolt of pure lightning struck the battlements where the crossbowmen had been, sending stone and men flying. The display of raw, untethered elemental power silenced the courtyard. The Stormbringer King was no longer negotiating. "Get on the eagle, Ilara," Lysander commanded, his voice tight with controlled fury. As Kale half-dragged, half-carried her the final distance, a new sound cut through the aftermath of thunder, a deep, earth-shaking roar from the northern gate. Not a sound of storm, but of stone and rage. The massive gates, sealed moments before, shuddered, then exploded inward in a shower of splinters and dust. Standing in the breach was a figure even larger than Lysander, clad in granite-like armor, his skin the color of baked clay. Bram, the Earth Shaper Alpha, his territory bordered Stone Peak to the north. He had felt the cold pulse, and he had come with shocking speed, his personal war beasts, lumbering creatures of rock and moss, at his heels. The little chill, Bram's voice grated like boulders grinding together, his eyes, like chips of obsidian, locked onto Ilara. The stories are true, the Frostblood lives. He completely ignored the Stone Peak Alpha. This was now a contest between kings. Lysander positioned himself between Ilara and the new threat. "Bram, this does not concern you." "Anything that weakens the Stormbringer line concerns me," Bram laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You think you can hide a prize like this, a key to the old prophecy? She is a relic, and relics belong in a museum or buried deep." The situation was collapsing from a covert escape into a 3-way standoff with a helpless Omega as the trophy. Ilara felt a hysterical laugh bubble in her throat. All her life, she'd been nothing. Now, 2 of the most powerful beings on the continent were about to go to war over her, while a third looked on with greedy, murderous intent. Then the worst possible thing happened. A high, clear horn sounded from the eastern road, not a war horn, a hunting horn, and from the forest tree line figures emerged. They moved with a silent, liquid grace, their forms seeming to flicker between solid and shadow. They wore gray and green, and their eyes held a piercing, hungry green light. The shadow stalkers, the assassins of the forest packs. They were not alphas claiming a throne. They were contractors, killers for hire. And they were here for one thing, to ensure no one claimed the Frost Wolf. Bram scowled. "Alaric, you fool, you called in cleaners." The Stone Peak Alpha looked pale. "I did not. They must have been hired by a rival council member." It didn't matter who. The calculus had just changed again. The Shadow Stalkers didn't want to capture Ilara. Their mandate would be simple: terminate the bloodline permanently. They were the scalpel to the Alphas, Warhammers. Lysander's jaw was clenched so tight Ilara thought she heard his teeth crack. His plan lay in ruins. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and the asset they were protecting was now the target of every faction on the field. He made a decision. He turned to Ilara, his eyes blazing. "Can you do it again?" The cold. I don't know," she stammered. "Fear isn't working, you need something else. Anger, focus, think of them." He gestured at the converging forces, the greedy Earth Shaper, the duplicitous Stone Peak Wolves, the silent, lethal assassins slinking closer. "Think of every person who ever made you feel small, who made you hide, who wants to kill you for what you are. They don't get to win. Do you understand? They do not get to win." His words ignited something different inside her, not the sharp panic of the tunnel, but a slow, burning coal of rage. She looked at the faces of the men who saw her as a thing, a key, a stain to be erased. She thought of her mother, living in fear, of herself, a ghost in her own life. The coal burst into flame. She stepped out from behind Kale. She raised her head. The air around her began to waver, like heat haze off a desert, but cold. A biting, dry cold that stole the breath from every throat in the courtyard. Frost erupted from her feet, spreading in a complex, jagged pattern across the flagstones, racing toward the stone peak in forces, toward Bram's war beasts. It wasn't a wave of ice, it was a claiming. The very stone wept frost. She looked at Bram. "You want to bury me?" Her voice, when it came, was layered with an echoing chill, the voice of a deep glacier. "Try." She pointed a finger, not at him, but at the ground between him and his beasts. The earth didn't freeze, it shattered. A fissure ripped open, not from heat, but from the violent expansion of instant permafrost. One of the rock beasts tumbled into the crevasse with a sound of grinding stone. The display of directed, aggressive power stunned everyone, even Lysander. This wasn't a defensive burst. This was an announcement. The Frost Wolf was not prey. She was an alpha-level power awakening in real time. Bram took a step back, his obsidian eyes wide. The shadow stalkers paused, recalculating. A moving target was one thing, a nascent elemental force was another. Lysander saw the opening. "Now," he roared to his guards. In the moment of shocked hesitation, he grabbed Ilara and practically threw her onto the back of the nearest storm eagle. Kale cut the tether lines. The great bird, feeling the unrestrained aura of its master and the strange, powerful cold of its new passenger, needed no command. It beat its vast wings, kicking up a hurricane of dust and ice chips. As they lifted off the ground, an arrow from a shadow stalker whistled past Ilara's head. Another was deflected by a sudden gust of wind. Lysander summoned with a flick of his wrist. They rose above the courtyard, above the keep, the world falling away into a blur of torchlight and shouting faces. But they were not safe. Bram, in a rage, was bellowing orders. From the northern forests, dark shapes took to the air. Not eagles, but giant, twisted bats, the earth shapers, foul-tempered flying mounts. The chase was on, not across land, but across the moonlit sky. And ahead, the storm front Lysander had summoned earlier now boiled, a wall of black cloud and lightning. Their path led straight into the heart of the tempest. They flew into the storm, and the storm welcomed them home. For Lysander, the raging tempest was an extension of his will, a familiar chaos he could navigate blindfolded. For Ilara, clinging to the harness with frozen fingers, it was a baptism of ice and lightning. The giant bats of the Earth Shaper gave chase, but they were creatures of cave and stone, clumsy in the violent, shifting winds. Lysander, his hand pressed against the Storm Eagle's neck, guided the bird through thunderheads that exploded around them, using the chaos as cover. Lightning forks lit up the sky, revealing the pursuers falling back, disoriented and battered by hail. But the storm was also a veil, hiding new threats. From the cloud layer below, a sleek dark shape shot upward, a shadow stalker assassin riding a giant owl, its feathers silent as death. A throwing knife glinted in the flash of lightning, aimed at the eagle's wing joint. Lysander saw it too late. Ilara didn't think, she reacted. A surge of protective fury, not for herself, but for the noble beast carrying them, and the man behind her focused her will. She flung out a hand. The moisture in the air between them and the assassin crystallized instantly, forming a thick, sudden wall of opaque ice. The knife shattered against it. The owl veered, screeching, and was lost in the gloom. Lysander looked back at her, rain and wonder on his face. "Control," he shouted over the wind. "You're learning." The Storm Eagle, sensing the opening, dove through a break in the clouds. Below them stretched the jagged, magnificent peaks of the Stormhold Mountains. Carved into the side of the tallest peak was a fortress of dark stone and glittering quartz, lit from within by 1,000 points of light. Lysander's capital. It was a sight to steal the breath, a monument to raw power and artistry. But as they spiraled down toward a wide landing terrace, Ilara could see the fortress was on high alert. Siege lamps swept the skis, and ranks of armored guards lined the walls. They landed with a jolt. Dozens of warriors bowed as Lysander dismounted, but their eyes were on Ilara, taking in her disheveled appearance, the residual frost still dusting her hair and lashes. The mate bond between her and Lysander, no longer suppressed by distance or terror, snapped into absolute focus. It was a physical tether, a warm, golden thread in her chest that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. The intensity of it was staggering, a claim that was neither request nor demand, but simple, immutable fact. Lysander didn't address his court. He pulled Ilara close, his hands on her shoulders, his forehead nearly touching hers. The public intimacy was a message in itself. You are safe here. These walls have never fallen. This is your sanctuary and your throne. He then turned to his waiting commanders, his voice shifting to the tone of a general. Bram and the Shadow Stalkers will not attack the hold directly. They will rally their allies on the council. We have hours, maybe a day, before they declare my actions a theft and a casus belli. I want every scout in the air. I want the storm wards at full strength, and bring the seer to the high hall. He led Ilara inside, through corridors thrumming with preparation. The fortress was a living entity, a blend of ancient stone and latent magical energy. They arrived at a set of towering doors engraved with lightning patterns. The high hall. Inside, it was less a throne room and more a war room. A massive table held a glowing topographic map of the northern territories. Waiting beside it was an elderly woman, frail-looking but with eyes that held the calm of deep, still waters. The seer. Lyra, Lysander said, his voice respectful. The frost wolf has awakened. The seer Lyra looked at Ilara, not with fear or reverence, but with a profound, weary sadness. So the wheel turns. Come here, child. Ilara approached hesitantly. Lyra took Ilara's hands in her own. A jolt passed between them, a flash of visions, glacial peaks, a crown of ice, a child with storm-gray and frost-blue eyes. Lyra released her, looking at Lysander. The prophecy is in motion. The bloodline is true, but you know the price, Lysander. The other elemental lines will see unification as subjugation. They will come, all of them. I know, Lysander said grimly. There is more, Lyra continued, her gaze piercing Ilara. The power within you, it was not just hidden, it was bound asterisk. A latent genetic lock placed upon the Frost Wolf line after the purge, a failsafe to prevent exactly this scenario. Your mother, or perhaps her mother, carried a suppression spell in her very blood. Your tears freezing, that was the lock cracking. What you unleashed at Stone Peak was the first fracture. The full power it will be catastrophic to unleash without control. You must be taught, and there is only one left who can teach you. Who? Ilara asked. Lyra's smile was thin, the one who placed the bindings in the first place, the last Frost Wolf Alpha who survived the purge. He did not die, he fled, and he has been waiting. The revelation was a seismic shock. Lysander stared. Alaric Frostweaver, he lives. In a manner of speaking, Lyra said, he exists in the Grey Haven, the glacial valley at the northern crown of the world, a self-imposed exile maintaining the bindings from afar. To truly claim her destiny, she must go to him. He must willingly release the final lock. Only then can she control the frost, and only then can the bond between you two settle into its true, balanced form. Without it, her power will continue to erupt unpredictably, and the mating bond will remain unstable. Primal. Ilara felt a surge of defiant hope. A teacher, someone of her own blood, we must go to him. Lysander shook his head, already running tactical scenarios. The Grey Haven is beyond the borders, in contested, frozen wastes. It's a journey of weeks, and every enemy we have will be between us and it. It's a suicide mission. Staying here is a slower suicide, Ilara countered, a new steel in her voice. The bond flared between them, not with conflict, but with a challenging synergy. You are a storm bringer, you command the sky, I am learning to command the cold. Between us, we can cross any waste. And you said it yourself, we face war either way. Would you rather face it with a weapon half-forged or one fully realized? He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a relic or a prophecy, but as a partner. The Omega who had shrunk from his gaze in the courtyard was gone. In her place stood a queen in waiting, forged in fear and tempered by lightning. The mate bond sang between them, a chord of perfect, fearsome harmony. He saw his own resolve reflected in her frost-blue eyes. Then we go, he said, the decision etching new lines of determination on his face. But not as refugees, as a royal progression. We send word to the council. We declare our intent to unite the lines according to the ancient prophecy. We frame the journey not as a retreat, but as a coronation pilgrimage. It will force their hand. They will either have to publicly accept the old ways or reveal themselves as traitors to our deepest traditions. It was a breathtakingly bold gambit, a political masterstroke that turned their greatest weakness, the need to flee to a distant sanctuary, into a show of supreme strength and legitimacy. The next 36 hours were a whirlwind. Lysander's declaration was sent via crystalcast across the continent. The reaction was instant and volcanic. Bram, the Earthshaper, denounced it as a theatrical land grab. The Shadowstalker clans, their contract now complicated by public scrutiny, melted back into the forests, but their threat remained. Other, smaller alpha lines began to choose sides. Some, weary of constant strife, saw the prophecy as a hopeful myth. Others saw only the storm, bringer gaining an unstoppable advantage. Ilara, meanwhile, began her first lessons, not in magic, but in politics, history, and the art of wielding presence. Lysander's trusted advisors, including a fierce female general named Anya, drilled her on lineage, protocol, and the map of alliances. She learned to channel the constant, humming energy of the mate bond into a source of calm, not distraction. And she practiced small acts of control over her frost, cooling a goblet of water, tracing a pattern of rhyme on a window, stopping a tear before it could crystallize. The power was a wild river, but she was learning to build banks for it. At dawn on the second day, they departed Stormhold. The procession was small but formidable. Lysander and Ilara on the lead Storm Eagle, Kale now healed from his wounds, and General Anya on two others, escorted by a flight of a dozen elite riders. They flew north, towards the ever-present wall of winter on the horizon. The journey was a tense, silent battle against the elements and unseen watchers. They slept in short shifts in magical tents that shielded their heat signature, always moving. On the fifth night, as they camped on a windswept glacier, the first attack came, not from alphas, but from the land itself. A pack of ice wraiths, elemental predators drawn to Ilara's burgeoning frost magic, emerged from a crevasse. They were beings of living cold and hunger, with no minds to reason with. The fight was brutal and swift. Lysander's lightning seemed less effective against them, the energy dissipating in the intense cold. It was Ilara who turned the tide. Drawing on Lyra's teachings, she didn't just freeze them, she commanded the cold within them. She stilled their core energy, turning them into inert, beautiful statues of ice that shattered in the wind. In the aftermath, panting in the thin air, she and Lysander shared a look of mutual respect. They were a team. After 2 grueling weeks, they reached the foot of the mountains guarding the Grey Haven. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, and a perpetual blizzard howled around the peaks. No flying creature could penetrate that maelstrom. They would have to go on foot. Leaving the Eagles and most of the guard at a base camp, Lysander, Ilara, Kale, and Anya began the ascent. It was a test of pure endurance. Ilara, however, found the cold not an enemy, but a familiar embrace. Her frost magic acted as a buffer, and she led the way, using her power to solidify treacherous ice bridges and sense hidden crevasses. At the summit, the blizzard parted as if by command, revealing a valley of breathtaking, surreal beauty. A forest of crystalline trees, a river of slow-moving azure ice, and in the center, a palace carved from a single, colossal iceberg, the Grey Haven. Before the palace gates, a figure stood waiting. He was ancient, his long hair and beard the color of fresh snow, his skin pale blue, but his eyes were the same frost blue as Ilara's, blazing with undimmed power. Alaric Frostweaver. He did not smile. "Daughter of my daughter's line," his voice echoed, layered with the sound of grinding glaciers. "You have come to break the locks, and you, Storm King, you have come to claim your promised queen." "We have," Lysander said, his voice firm but respectful. Alaric's gaze weighed them both. "The bond is true, I can feel it. A storm seeking a calm eye, a glacier seeking the sun's warmth, a paradox that creates balance." He turned and led them into the ice palace. The interior was a labyrinth of frozen halls and rooms containing artifacts of the lost frost wolf culture. Finally, they entered a circular chamber with a pool of perfectly still, black water at its center. "The binding is not a spell I can simply lift," Alaric explained. "It is woven into the fabric of her genetic magic. To remove it, she must confront the memory of the trauma that caused it. She must relive the purge through the ancestral memory I hold. It will be agony, it may break her mind. And you, Storm King, cannot help her. You can only wait." Ilara looked at the dark pool, then at Lysander. The bond between them thrummed with shared fear and resolve. She saw the protest in his eyes, the need to protect. She sent a pulse of warmth back along the bond, a message of determination. "I have to do this," she said aloud. She stepped to the edge of the pool. Alaric placed a hand on her forehead. The world vanished. She was not Ilara. She was 100 frost wolves, feeling the betrayal, the fire, the cold steel of allies-turned executioners. She felt the panic as they hid their children, the despair as their magic was bound to save them from detection. She lived through the centuries of hiding, of fear, of the slow forgetting of their own glory. The pain was immense, a torrent of inherited grief. In the heart of the memory, she wanted to shatter, to let the cold consume everything. Then through the storm of pain, she felt it, a steady, warm pulse, a heartbeat not her own, an anchor in the chaos. Lysander, he was there at the edge of her consciousness, holding the tether of their bond, not intruding, not fighting her battle, but simply being there, a promise of a future beyond the pain. She focused on that warmth. She did not let the grief freeze her. She let it flow through her, acknowledged it, and then let it go. She was not just a vessel for old pain. She was the new beginning. She opened her eyes. She was back in the ice chamber on her knees. Frost patterns of incredible complexity, like blossoming fractal flowers, covered the floor around her. The air was calm and clear. The oppressive, hidden weight inside her was gone. In its place was a vast, quiet power, accessible and obedient. Alaric looked at her, and for the first time something like peace touched his ancient features. The bindings are released. The frost wolf line is free. He then looked at Lysander. "Treat her not as your completion, Storm King, but as your equal counterpart. For that is what the prophecy always meant, not a queen to bear your heir, but a sovereign to share your throne." The eternal winter is not an age of ice, but an age of balance, where storm and frost create a sustainable, peaceful world. The understanding settled over them. The prophecy had been misunderstood for centuries, twisted by fear. It was never about domination. It was about synergy. Alaric chose to remain in his exile, a guardian of the past. But he gifted Ilara with a circlet of living ice that would never melt, a symbol of her authority. As they began the journey back to Stormhold, the change was profound. Ilara's power was now a precise instrument. She could summon a blizzard or create a single, perfect snowflake. The mate bond settled into a deep, resonant harmony, a constant dialogue of strength and support. News of their success in the Grey Haven preceded them. It carried the weight of legend. When they landed once more on the terrace of Stormhold, they were met not just by their guards, but by a gathering of emissaries from dozens of packs, including several from factions that had been hostile. The display of unity, the confirmation of the prophecy's true meaning, and the raw, balanced power the couple now radiated was a political weapon no army could match. Grand Council was convened. Bram, the Earthshaper, stood defiant, but his support was crumbling. Lysander and Ilara stood before the assembled alphas not as supplicants, but as living proof of a new paradigm. Ilara spoke, her voice carrying the quiet authority of deep cold. She spoke of balance, not conquest, of using their elemental gifts to heal lands scarred by war, to ensure plenty, to create a council where all lines had a voice. She offered not subjugation, but a partnership. It was not a peaceful surrender. There were holdouts. Skirmishes would follow, but the tide had turned. The war for supremacy was evolving into a slower political negotiation for unification. The story of the Omega, with frozen tears, had rewritten the destiny of a world. One evening, months later, Ilara stood on the same balcony where she had first seen Stormhold. The fortress was being rebuilt, its architecture now incorporating elegant spires of fused ice and stone, a symbol of the new union. Lysander joined her, wrapping his arms around her. The bond between them was a quiet, joyous hum. "The seer Lyra wishes to see us tomorrow," he murmured. "She says the visions are clear now." Ilara leaned back into him, a smile touching her lips. She placed a hand on her abdomen, where a new, incredible warmth was growing alongside the familiar frost within her. She had known for a week, the final, surprising detail of the prophecy now coming to fruition. "The Supreme Alpha," she whispered. Lysander's breath caught. He turned her in his arms, his storm-gray eyes wide with awe, then filling with a love so fierce it rivaled his lightning. The prophecy was not an end. It was a beginning, their beginning, and as the first snow of the long, balanced winter began to fall, it melted against their warm skin, a promise of life, not an omen of cold. So what's the real lesson buried in the ice of this story? It's not just about hidden royal blood or magical prophecies. It's about the fundamental mechanics of power and perception. Ilara spent a lifetime believing her strangeness was a flaw to be hidden, a glitch in her biology. The world around her reinforced that at every turn. She was an omega, unranked, invisible. But that very flaw, the frozen tears, was the exact signature of her latent, monumental strength. It was a camouflage so perfect it hid her even from herself. The Alpha King, Lysander, didn't see a weakness when he spotted the ice on her cheek. He saw a lost language, a truth everyone else had forgotten how to read. His recognition wasn't just romantic, it was scholarly. He was the only one who had done the homework, who knew what to look for in the footnotes of history, and that knowledge turned what was seen as a liability into the ultimate strategic asset. Their journey reframes the classic chosen one narrative. Destiny didn't just drop a crown on her head, it forced her to walk through fire and blizzard to claim the tools to wield it. She had to confront the trauma baked into her bloodline, not to be defined by it, but to be freed from it. The power was always hers. The bindings were just fear, institutional and inherited. The union of storm and frost is the final masterstroke. It teaches us that true supremacy isn't about one element dominating all others. It's about synergy. The storm provides the dynamic energy for change. The frost provides the stable foundation, the lasting structure. One without the other is just weather, either chaotic or stagnant. Together, they create a new climate, a balanced system. Ilara's story, from a trembling archivist to a sovereign queen, shows us that the things that make you feel like an outsider, the secrets you're forced to keep, might not be your shame. They might be your blueprint, your unique code waiting for the right moment and the right person to be deciphered. The world often dismisses what it doesn't understand. But sometimes, all it takes is one person, one king, one moment of true seeing to change the definition of everything. If you loved this deep dive into a story where hidden strength triumphs, and where love is less about fate and more about fierce, chosen partnership, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm stories like this matter. Share this with someone who loves epic fantasy with a heart, and subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you never miss our next exploration into the hidden truths and explosive dramas lurking inside the stories you love. Let me know in the comments, what's the one thing you've been made to feel is a flaw that might actually be your greatest strength? Until next time.